Flattered to be here with such a distinguished panel, celebrated author and journalist, elected officials from 3 important countries who have been empowered to speak for their peoples. I'm a merely appointed official, so I speak for Secretary Clinton, who in turn speaks for a larger swath of the American public. And I want to say how much I'm glad to be here, not just for this event, which is important for me and for our government, but also to be here in Canada. Canada may well be my second favorite country. Canada is, as Mr. Van Loen said, a country that bases its foreign policy on values and principles. And I think that's rare enough in the world that it should be noted and celebrated. And Canada is our best ally in the world as we go abroad, further afield, in trying to strengthen democratic values and human rights. They're the most consistent, most reliable, most forceful ally we have in the UN. And so, even for a diplomat, for the State Department, coming to Canada is not so much like going to a foreign country, it's like coming home to a close ally and friend and brethren. So I'm really pleased to be here, and I want to make sure that you know that Canada is making its mark on the world, not only in the Ukrainian environment, but more broadly in the world, in Asia and Africa and this hemisphere. So I'm really pleased to be here for this. I'm also a little terrified, because I realize that I'm now in a room of 250 Ukrainians, Ukrainian Americans, and Ukrainian Canadians. Every one of you know way more about Ukraine than I will ever. And so I am very mindful of the fact that I'm not going to be able to tell you anything you don't already know about Ukraine. But maybe I can tell you, as Christy said, a little bit about how the current moment looks from inside the State Department. And this is in part based on my longer experience outside of government, working for Freedom House and the National Democratic Institute, and being a sometimes scholar of democratization in the world. This is a really hard one. This is a frustrating, beguiling conversation that we're having, not only about Ukraine, but more importantly with Ukraine. I came into this job 2 years ago, and my job is to look after human rights and democracy issues in a third of the world. My region stretches from Iceland to Sri Lanka, by way of Russia, Kazakhstan, and Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And when I came into this job a couple of years ago, I thought I'd spend a lot of time on Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Russia, and Caucasus, and some other places. I have found that I have spent a lot more time on Ukraine than I ever thought I would have 2 years ago. I've been to Ukraine more than I've been to any other country in my region. And it's partly because of Ukraine's departure from the democratic trajectory that it was on. And it's partly because we are engaged in a very vigorous and continuous way with the government of Ukraine, as well as with the civil society, people outside of the government of Ukraine. It's not like we're being shut out and told not to raise our issues and go away by the Ukrainian government when we go in and talk, as we do, about politically motivated prosecutions of political rivals, about threats to media independence, about harassment of civil society, about problems in the administration of local elections last year. We raise all these issues very directly with the senior-most officials in the Ukrainian government. We get all the meetings we want. We talk to everybody all the time. But they're not quite hearing us. And so we've seen a series of things happen, as you all know better than I do, over these last almost 2 years, of things about constraining the checks and balances and eliminating the space for political competition. We've seen it all. We publish annual reports on the state of human rights and democracy in Ukraine that you know are available on our website. We'll be releasing the next edition in the next couple of weeks. The nature of what's going on in Ukraine is not unknown to us any more than it is to you. The reasons that we're concerned are not that we want to punish you. We're not trying to punish Ukraine. We get suggestions that say, well, you should shun Ukraine because it's behaving badly. We don't really want to shun Ukraine. We want to embrace Ukraine. We want Ukraine to come closer to us, not further away. We want Ukraine to come closer to Europe. The example of Poland, Lithuania, and other neighbors are tremendous inspirations not only to the larger world, but especially to neighboring countries. The fact that these countries have emerged from communist tyranny and done so well over these last 20 years shows that it can be done in the neighborhood. And the role of Poland, you know, Canada may be my second favorite country, but Poland's certainly in my top several, because Poland...
Where's the train?
It's coming. You know, Poland really has a very activist foreign policy specifically on democracy and human rights, and not just in Ukraine, more broadly in the world. Under the current government, but also under previous administrations, Poland, I'd say uniquely among the former communist countries, has played a leading role on the world stage in being an advocate for principled foreign policy and helping democrats in tough situations elsewhere. Really is the leading country in that family of former communist countries that are now in Europe or seeking to get into Europe. The Community of Democracies is housed in Poland. Poland's been a very forward-leaning member in getting the European Union to be create an endowment to support democratic civil society around the world. There's a lot of things that are going on there. Foreign ministers in our city today, I think, in Washington. So they're very close partners as well, and it shows that it can be done. And in fact, Ukraine has shown that it can do the right thing when people want to. People in high places in Ukraine. Last year, a multi-party consensus emerged to adopt a law on public information, a kind of Freedom of Information Act that would nominally make available government records to journalists and scholars and the public. This happened because people from several different parties came together, compromised in a few ways, and came up with an important new law. The election law that will govern next October's parliamentary elections emerged at the turn of the year after long, painful standoff and occasional negotiations with some compromises that I think the opposition has embraced, as well as the government, and says this is a basis for having multi-party elections next October. The political process can work in Ukraine, and it does sometimes, but it doesn't work often enough to come up with honorable compromise and forward-leaning legislation that will structure the political system. So we know it can be done. This is not North Korea. This is a European country that is fully capable. Its people certainly have demonstrated in Canada and the United States that Ukrainians not only can live in democracies, they can thrive and be successful in democracies. So we know it's in the Ukrainian people to do this. It's not clear as if it's in the Ukrainian leadership to do this. And when I say that, I don't only talk about the present government. And I know there are some friends of mine here who served in previous governments. I think there were some opportunities lost in previous administrations too. It was said earlier that the Orange Revolution represented a kind of second beginning for Ukraine's independence. I think that's right. But it was a second beginning that was squandered. And the Ukrainian leadership of the day and the international friends of Ukraine, I think, shared some responsibility for not pressing the Ukrainian administrations between 2004 and 2010 to do more to consolidate the potential for democratic transition. They were distracted. We let ourselves be distracted. And we shouldn't let that happen again. We have to remain engaged with Ukraine in a friendly, forceful way, supporting its better instincts, its democratic people, and looking for ways to bring it further into the Western family of nations, and not to, I don't know, there's pressures, and some of you are applying the pressure, that say we should punish Ukraine. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to drive Ukraine further away from the West. I want to embrace Ukraine and invite it into the West. And how we do that is the question that we're confronting. And so the reason I've come to this conference and the reason that I'm here tonight is to learn from all of you who know a lot more about Ukraine than I do, how we might do that. What are some of the other factors that we should consider in our engagement with Ukraine in order that the future of Ukraine, which has to be decided by Ukrainians, that they make better choices, and that we see that Ukraine, which will fully consolidate its independence and sovereignty as a democratic country. In fact, I dare say that I think it's only as a fully democratic country that Ukraine can secure its sovereignty. In the 21st century, if a government isn't a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, then it's not really a sovereign government. If you're not a government of the people, then you're a government against the people. And so for that, for a modern country to be fully sovereign, it has to be fully democratic. That's my personal view. And I think that that's an important part of what Ukraine's story of independence tells us. And we're partway along that way. It's early days in Ukraine's independent history. We're 21 years into this, and I hope that we will soon see a return to that democratization trajectory. And I think that the contributions that people in this room have made to that, and will continue to make to that this year and beyond, will be necessary parts of that. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the people who are still living in Ukraine and are going to be living there in the future that will determine the course of its trajectory. So I'll leave it at that for now. I'm glad to join in the wider conversation.